So, how about that season 4? So I'm pretty sure if you're watching this, you're probably already aware that a Bluey special dropped last week. Oh boy. It's a whole 28 minutes, 4 times the length of an average episode. I thought it was peak. I enjoyed myself. I think I'm the only one that didn't bawl their eyes out while watching it, though. Enjoyed entirely without tears. Can you believe that? I don't know if this would come as a surprise to anyone, but I've actually liked Bluey for quite a while. Even before it was a mainstream success, I'd seen potential in it from far away. I had a feeling shit was gonna pop off. Perhaps not to this extent, though. This is kind of weird. The point is, I've had Bluey thoughts to share for quite a while. I figured this was a good opportunity to excise a few of them into the ether. You know I'm doing this for the love of the game, because Bluey content is by far probably the most saturated topic in the history of animation. It literally gets no worse than this. But if you haven't watched the episode, or even the show at large, I don't know, maybe you'll get some out of this. I guess spoilers for the episode, though. I guess I'll have to recap it for the uninitiated. You probably already know that the main premise at hand is that the family that we're following, the healers, are selling off their family home. The patriarch got a new job far, far away from where they live, so they're moving out of the area entirely. And the title character, our star protagonist, is just not having that shit. When she gets to... Is she in kindergarten now? I'm pretty sure she is.
Nope.
When she gets to kindergarten, her teacher tells her a story about this farmer that keeps his mind open to the possibility that some good shit is actually bad and some bad shit is actually good. Moral of the story? Everything's uncertain. Nothing is real. It's pretty realistic, but it's probably not something that a 6-year-old could easily grasp. I don't even remember how old she is now. I'm the fakest fan around. But the home being sold off dovetails off of this seemingly secondary plot that follows the marriage of these two recurring characters. They actually met in an episode from like a season and a half ago, where they both end up babysitting the 2 girls due to a clerical error. They bond a little bit, you know, there's a little bit of banter. A little bit of banter, and they fall in love off screen for the most part. And then it culminates in this, which, you know, we're all pretty excited about. The theories foretold of this, but due to some spat about where they'll live as a married couple, the bride is like this close to like calling everything off. She drives off to who knows where, and the wedding is in danger of just not happening. So it's basically Bluey, Bingo, their mom, and their 2 cousins that are on a wild goose chase to bring the bride back to the backyard to try and figure this shit out. It's a wild caper for the ages. Hijinks will ensue, and you will be seated. Most people have probably noted by this point that there is a very cyclical nature to the episode itself, meaning that a lot of little things lead into another. There's a bit of a domino effect occurring. All of these seemingly minor things weigh into the big climax, and it becomes even more of a satisfying watch if you are caught up on your Bluey lore. There is love, there is loss, there's a pretty good wedding, and there's also a message espoused all throughout, is that despite the happy endings presented, everything is relative, right? All you can really do is just sit back and wait for the chaos to unfold, because nothing is truly certain in this world, or the next, if such a thing can exist.
There's nothing we can do. It's out of our hands.
Again, you've probably already seen the last 2 minutes. Bluey is no stranger to dramatic endings and things like that. There's a lot of beautiful artistic pieces that happen in the last 30, 60 seconds of any one of those cartoons. This is by far one of the corniest, and I mean that quite affectionately, but damn. Can it get any cheesier? But anyway, this made everyone cry, and that was pretty much a wrap. That was a very abbreviated recap. I would just recommend watching the episode itself. You don't really need much familiarity with Bluey in order to finish it and enjoy it, but I do understand if you want to hold off for whatever reason. There's been a lot of discussion over the inherent meaning of the episode and how well it was executed, specifically over the ending being a toss-up, maybe feeling like a bit of a cop-out, because how can you reinforce the cold, or rather lukewarm, uncertainty of the universe itself if you're giving these kids a warm and fuzzy happy ending to chew on? That don't make no sense. To me, I definitely was thinking this, at least after the initial screening. Like, it doesn't doesn't entirely contradict its message, but at the same time, it's still like a show for 3-year-olds. It's kind of difficult to reinforce something like that with that type of ending in mind. While not entirely intentional, I do kind of feel like the pacing and the motivations of the episode do flip-flop back and forth, and in some way do kind of reinforce that central message. There's some times when it feels very meandering and kind of aimless, pretty neutral in presentation, and there are others where it's hit the ground running, and it knows exactly where it wants to go, and it's waiting for the music to swell, and for the beat to kick up, until it can have its big, epic moment. I mean, that is the trade-off for the show at large. It's a lot of those big and little moments that are sprinkled about. They create these little pockets, these little vignettes in these characters' lives, and we can take a lot of big lessons out of such little moments. That is the central appeal of the universe. So if you don't consume it in isolation, you could just argue that this is indicative of the show itself. It is a perfect pastiche everything they did over the last 5 or 6 years. You know, Bluey itself doesn't really swing in either direction very neatly, which gives it that accessibility that people really crave. You have that episode from this past season where one of the kids' dads makes all these kids play a really archaic version of a party game wherein only one person wins. No fucking snowflake participation trophies out here, and it's well received. But then there's like whole episodes dedicated to like establishing boundaries and listening and actually learning from your kids, which is great, but very progressive ideology. I don't know, guys. I don't think you can fully acknowledge the unwokeness of Bluey without also acknowledging that all of these motherfuckers send their kids to a Montessori school. They run around all day, they do unstructured learning like the real hippies. It has never landed neatly on one side of the coin over the other, which again is what makes it so palatable to a wide audience. I think if you're more practically minded, you'd be more likely to object to how this ended, which again, I think is pretty understandable. I do think it's kind of funny that the episode itself wanted to enforce almost a mystical quality around the uncertainty of life, because everything was cyclical, and it kind of gives the impression that everything was passive, but everything turned out the way that it did because everyone was fighting for something that they believed in. But again, the whole episode is about the journey itself rather than just the end result, and I think focusing on the latter is also a mentality that is pushing back against. I found the discussion really interesting from the standpoint of the show itself, because you could very well view it as a meta commentary on how the series has been developing, and more importantly, whether or not you're getting a 4th season at all. Season 3 began airing September 2021, but by April of the following year, you had animators and VFX artists rolling off of production. I think by June or July of 2022, you had the creator of the whole thing, Joe Brum, saying, yeah, I mean, we're done. Season 3, we pretty much finished production. And what we wouldn't figure out until literally a year after that was that the crew had been planning to take a big hiatus from the show, just to try to figure out what they wanted to do next. Now, by the time this was announced, they would have already started it, because again, they had finished all these episodes over a year before they had made this statement. And by the time it was officially confirmed that the sign would in fact not be the final piece of Bluey media released, it's already been like 2-3 years since they announced, well, since they started the hiatus in general. So it's kind of a clusterfuck. I don't think it's hard to see a timeline where Bluey continues on in some capacity, but for me, at least, it's also not difficult to imagine a timeline where it just ends here. Because while there are over 9,000 companies gunning for their little slice of the Bluey pie, there is also probably a unique sense of power and authority that comes with being known as one of the few motherfuckers that actually puts this show together at the top level. Being Joe Brum, you could probably walk away from that shit scorched earth and make sure nobody ever makes another Bluey thing for your entire lifetime. Do I think it would do that? Probably not, but it is possible. It's kind of an awesome power, especially given how animation's been treated the last few years. Can we just take a minute to acknowledge how cool it is that this show is entirely produced in Aussie land? I just love that so much. Animation is very much a group effort. Even when you're working by yourself, there's always other people and entities that are influencing your line of thought, your judgment, your artistic process. And that's cool, but sometimes too many cooks can spoil a perfectly good season. But in this case, this is a show that this guy kept very close to his chest. He was able to assemble a group of his friends and onboard a whole group of youngins that just got out of college, and they built this beautiful mess together without any help. Prior to this show coming out, Australia was not really known as an animation juggernaut. It would be shitty and unfair to say that they've had zero influence on the international scene, but they certainly were never a superpower at any point. And the animation community is also responsible for furthering this line of thought. And I mean, I kinda don't blame them. I kinda get it, guys. I don't condone it, but I do understand it. So having this show come right the fuck out of nowhere, being locally sourced and made and produced by this guy that just really delved deep into child psychology and got into the weeds and like spent a decade in London working on all types of shows. You don't know how cathartic it was to hear this man name drop Charlie and Lola as like a real auteur experience in the preschool game. That was metal. Most of the time people would just name drop Peppa Pig for the sake of it because like aesthetically that is the most adjacent thing to Bluey you could come up with. But Charlie and Lola, what a fucking deep cut. To know that it directly influenced Bluey, greatest to ever do it. There is no other like it. And while there's no one currently working on any media production for Bluey itself, it's probably left a great blueprint for future productions to be kickstarted in the region, maybe even in the country. It's great. It's great for pretty much everyone involved. But yeah, the future is very uncertain. Even at this particular point where the bombastic, absolute blowout performance of this special would probably point towards that movie being more and more of a reality, anything could really happen. There's a lot of cartoons that have been produced in the midst of great hardship and tragedy. There are animated projects that may have kickstarted a lot of said struggle and turmoil. Disney announces Moana 2, or really like the secret Disney Toon sequel that they don't want you to know about. Everyone claps like seals, and nobody acknowledges the fact that a bunch of TV artists were paid TV wages to make a whole ass movie that they decided to cobble together at the last minute. You know? It's the little things that nobody cares about. Obviously, even if the production of Bluey has a positive effect on the animation industry in a local context, it would take a lot more to offset the general ennui and tumult that's been cultivated over the course of the pandemic. The series is very much a happy accident, from its production all the way to its meteoric rise. It's not something that could really be produced in a boardroom at this point, which is how most current media is being cleaved from Adam's rib. And by cleaved from Adam's rib, I mean pulled straight from the recycling bin from like 13 years ago. For as big as this actual franchise is now, it's hard to forget that it's still like a little scrappy guy. You know, anything could have happened in between then and now, and completely tanked this whole production. A little trivia for you. The average 11-minute episode of your favorite Western cartoon takes on average about 8 to 10 months to bring that shit to life. This could also apply to 22-minute segments as well. In the case of like Family Guy or The Simpsons, it usually takes closer to like a year to finish off an episode. A 7-minute Bluey episode takes about 3 to 4 months. It's 2/3 the size of an 11-minute joint, and it takes half the time to finish. It's not the craziest figure I've ever heard. You can make a South Park episode in a week, you can make an episode of home movies in about a month, but 3 to 4 months? It's nothing to sneeze at. It's a pretty good lead time for this little scrappy Australian dog cartoon. So whenever they decide to get the ball rolling again, it probably wouldn't be in bad shape. It's just a matter of actually ending the hiatus and making the cartoon. Though even taking all of that into account, the actual message itself, or even how well done it was, is secondary to how it made everybody feel. A lot of the discussion around the episode has been placed on the fact that it is a fucking preschool cartoon that's moved everybody to tears, crying literal rivers into existence. And I mean, it is a little much, you know? I'm not used to this. It's kind of fascinating, actually. But again, it's just, this series has not been around very long at all, and for it to have that kind of reach, being made in the medium it is, being made for the demographic that it is, that's real. It's fucking inspiring. I think most Bluey fans actually had that episode for them before this moment. For a lot of people, it was Sleepy Time, is that one where the little orange dog goes in space, and it has a real adventure, like goes through character development and shit. And then for others, it was the one where the big blue dog learns to appreciate life because his kids are fucking around while they're going to get Chinese food. For me, I think that episode was a season 1 joint. It was called Camping. It was about the Healer family going on vacation, and you have Bluey befriending this French-speaking lab, and they spend like 3 or 4 days mucking around this campsite, having the time of their lives. And then one day, she runs up to his tent and the family is nowhere to be found. Later that night, she has a heart-to-heart with her mom, and it is some of the most soulful shit imaginable. It's not something that I had never heard before prior to that, but I think that shit altered my brain chemistry. There was just something different. And I mean, if you watch the last 10, 20 seconds, I mean, come on, peak. That's literally peak right there. Point being, I do think there's some comfort in uncertainty. That's the only thing that's truly guaranteed in life, is that shit is always uncertain. There will be highs and lows and midpoints, plateaus, and wild roller coasters, you know? Plenty of stuff to embrace. Plenty of stuff to be repelled by. Plenty of stuff to help you learn and change and grow and think. So much stuff out there. Life is an ever-changing, ever-morphing mass of whatever. But like in the eyes of each individual person, it's our world and everybody else is living in it. So you don't ever really know where you stand. Again, everything is relative. It is partially a matter of what you make of it. But a lot of shit is just kind of handed to you blind, with no clear instructions on how any of this is supposed to go. I don't necessarily think Bluey is endorsing blind faith here. More so the expectation that there is always some end. Not necessarily a light at the end of the tunnel, right? But there's always something more. Is that usually you'll get through whatever it is you're encountered with. Even if that situation changes, there's always something else right around the corner. It never ends. While this isn't the end of Bluey, the show is going to have to conclude at some point. Hopefully. God, I hope they don't reboot this shit like 5 or 6 times. I would die. But it is reminding you that there's a whole other world beyond it. It can only really give you a few snapshots out of a whole environment. You just gotta go out and find it. Whether things line up perfectly or not, you just kind of have to take it as a sign that it is. Not good, not bad, it is. And when you invite yourself to plunge into the uncertainties of life, you will eventually see it for what it is. But in order to see it for what it is, you have to first be willing to say,
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Anyway, when do you think we're getting season 5?